Hello everybody, my name is Mark Long. I am the co-founder of Numi and your host. And today's guest is Sarah Persov. Sarah is an engineering leader at a company called Dojo, and she's a passionate and fervent advocate of women in tech and diversity. We're going to talk about a load of things today, including how not to be a dick.
Yes.
Which makes me laugh a lot. So thank you for coming today, and please go ahead and do a better job of introducing yourself than I just did.
Hi everyone. I actually think you did a pretty good job. So I am currently an engineering team lead. It's a mix of people management, architecture, design, strategy, and really figuring things out. And I'm also the head of women in tech at Dojo. Now, what that means for me is that I spend up to, during work hours, 30% of my time, but including out of work hours, a lot more than that, talking to women across the industry, including women who have left the industry. So not just within Dojo, but all over. And what I'm doing is I'm actually finding out what they are experiencing. Instead of it just being studies or LinkedIn posts, I'm actually finding out what are the challenges they're facing, what are the different things that are making them feel whichever way they feel. Mm-hmm. And as I am an engineer, I'm then aggregating, anonymizing that data, and I then use it to build initiatives to help bring people, but especially senior leadership, into the world of what women in tech are actually experiencing and why that is causing them to actually leave the industry at a significant rate. And I do a lot of talks, I do podcasts, and I also sometimes also go into companies and work with the exec team or senior leadership, where I go through essentially my normal talk, but in a much more intimate setting where I can really dedicate the time to explain everything in a way that they can connect with and help start their journey on how to do better.
Well, you really are a fervent advocate, aren't you? Like championing and really, really going out there and making it happen. So that's amazing. What is, you just said so many things then.
Sorry.
First off, so what is the consolidated, is there a theme, a number of themes for why women are leaving the industry? You just said that, right?
Yeah. So this is kind of obviously a slightly generalized part, but there are a lot of different things that contribute to them leaving. A big part of it is that there's a lot of different microaggressions and behaviours that are often not done on purpose. A lot of this is covert, a lot of this is subconscious, that is really building up over time. It's essentially death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it's been really exacerbated in the last few years due to the increase of that really severe right-wing incel social media, where you've got people like Andrew Tate going and telling young, vulnerable men that women are the cause for them to not be succeeding. So you've now got this kind of dichotomy of, you've got old school sexism that's still around and slowly fading out, and then you've got the new radicalization that's coming in. And what lots of women have found is they are instantly dismissed. They're not given the same basic respect. But on top of it, due to a misunderstanding of what positive discrimination is, there's been more and more people, not just men, but in general people, who feel like a woman or a minority has only been given that role because they're a woman or a minority, not because they have the expertise or the skills. So women who get through an interview, and actually, because we both know that women are not treated equally in an interview process in the same way that men are, they're often actually starting with low confidence, imposter syndrome, things that we all know about. But they're constantly having to fight to be heard, fight to be listened to, respected, treated as an equal, whilst also feeling like they have to be amazing, because often when you're the only woman, what ends up happening is that people essentially make you the token. So I've spoken to so many people who said, like, well, I had a really bad experience once with a female engineer, so now I don't trust female engineers. And they disregard the fact that there's more than one. Mm-hmm. But because of this pressure, women are also expected to be Wonder Woman or Superwoman. They're expected to go above and beyond without actually being recognised for that extra work they're putting in. And by extra work, I mean things like going out of their way to make people feel welcome and helping them with problems after work and taking meeting notes and organising documentation and organising meetings and really a pastoral mode type care. And it's overwhelming because you're constantly having to fight. You're having to prove yourself, but you're not also then bonding in the same way often. When you've got a team that's an established team and they've never worked with a woman, it can be really jarring for that team to have to change habits, change maybe what they're talking about during like team socials, after work, stuff like that. But that isolation that often comes with being the only woman has been proven time and time again to really impact your career, because people don't give you that respect.
It starts with education, I'm sure. It starts with childhood, I'm sure. Flashcards, learning to speak, nurse, female, pilot, male. And there's no role models for a woman in education to be a software engineer, to be a technologist. Or is that changing?
I believe it is changing, but it's still very prevalent. And I think whilst the best course obviously would be to change the education, my kind of focus is actually changing top-down behaviour. Because when you join your first job, you will subconsciously mimic the behaviour of your manager. Because that's what people do. They mimic behaviour so they fit in, because that gives you a feeling that you're more likely to succeed, you're safer. But their manager will have done the same thing, and their manager will have done the same thing. So when you have old school behaviour that, you know, was very sexist and often openly sexist, even if it's changing and it's more, you know, subtle, they're still going to subconsciously mimic that behaviour. So I feel like, you know, there are multiple approaches here. We've got the education side, which is the responsibility of both the parents and the education system. Mm-hmm. But there's the side that I can actually slowly start to help impact, which is from the management and the leadership, where they become aware, really. A lot of this stuff is incredibly hard to call out. It's really taken in isolation. Each little thing would, you know, not be considered important enough to bring up. And the women I've spoken to, and from my own experiences, when you try to bring it up, what ends up happening is that you're told you're being overly emotional or you're overreacting, because women aren't really allowed to show emotion in the workplace. They're not allowed to show anger. They're not allowed to show being hurt, because it's then taken as, oh, you're just being a hysterical woman. And that's why it's really important that we don't just try and educate the younger generation, but we also educate the senior leadership.
Is it too far gone with some of the senior leadership? Some of, you know, habits, right? You know, if somebody's been in business for 30 years, in reality, what are the chances of them changing? There's like ingrained ways of being a manager. If you faced that, would you kind of give up and just go and find somewhere else to work, or would you work with it? I know that's like, it's not a yes or no question, but do you get my point?
It's really complicated. So from my experience with kind of running, that's actually what my How to Not Be a Dick workshop
Come on,
was.
let's do the how not to be a dick.
So
how to not be a dick.
My whole How to Not Be a Dick workshop was for very senior management. And it was and is a very intimate setting where it's, you know, a couple of hours in a room. It's confidential, it's private. And I really connect with them as a person to then help bring them into the world and find a way for it to click for them. But that isn't always possible. There's a certain amount of, you have to be willing to try. I'm not saying it's always successful. And as you said, it's not just building new habits, it's changing old habits, and that's hard. But I also don't think it should be on the responsibility of women in their company who are currently the ones having to fight this and keep themselves safe mentally. And, you know, especially when they've lost their confidence, it shouldn't be their responsibility. I always say that if you've got, let's say, a women in tech community or DEI champions or somebody that you're close with in HR, go to them, try, you know, bring it up. But if nothing changes, then you should leave, because first and foremost, you need to put yourself first.
Yeah. Without being the hysterical woman in the room.
Yeah.
Which, and here's a stereotype. I know this from the recruitment perspective, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but women won't put themselves forward unless they're 100% confident that they reach or could achieve, is it 80 or more % of the skills?
That's the statistic that I've read. It kind of varies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the rough one. Coming back to the emotion side of it, I once read a quote about how the greatest feat of man was that they've convinced the world that male anger is not an emotion, it's passion, and it's a positive. Whereas women's anger is dismissed because it's being hysterical and overly emotional. And this is a big part of the problem, is that any emotion women show, good or bad, it's taken as, well, this is just them being a silly woman. And they have to really constantly, like, be careful and mask and not be able to really be in the moment, because then they might do something like, I don't know, get really excited. Whereas with men, the amount of times I've had a man raise their voice at me, and I've told them they've raised their voice, and they said, no, I'm not. And I was like, you are. You're literally, your voice is raised. You know, maybe you need to go and calm down. And they get so angry when I point out that
my wife says that to me. You're raising your voice. I'm not. You are. I'm not.
And it's an easy thing to do, right? But the bigger thing is that it's largely still very acceptable for men to raise their voice in the work culture, especially when you're on Zoom. And women don't get that same luxury.
Do you have those, I'm sure you've seen it, those Zoom meetings where somebody that, you know, might be the woman is trying to speak, or they're being really cordial and they're pushing the hand up button, and the conversation's just going on and they just give up in the end? They just don't say what they were going to say.
It happens all the time, and Zoom has made it, or online in general, has made it a lot harder. I think it's made it harder for anyone who's quiet as well.
Yeah.
But at least when you're in person, you can kind of cough loudly and make eye contact with somebody else, and maybe even stand up, right? Whereas when you're on Zoom, you can't try and command it.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly tiring thing over a period of time, right? I mean, everybody has bad days, everybody has bad weeks. But when you're constant, and often you don't even realize it's happening because you've been conditioned to think that this is normal, this is right, you know. I've heard so many women tell me that they don't want to speak up because they should feel lucky and fortunate that they were given the chance to have this job.
Wow.
And I say to them, well, you deserve the job, right? Like, it's not like you were just plucked off the street and told, you're now a software engineer, you're now a project manager. It's you have worked for this.
Yeah.
And that's where it's really tricky, because you might feel like you're in a shit situation and you might know that you're not being treated fairly, but you know what's going on. And sometimes it's easier, and I don't mean that in a negative way, to stay where you are even if things are hard, putting yourself in that incredibly vulnerable situation of moving. Because yeah, it might be a much better environment, but it could be worse.
Yeah.
And you might not feel like you have enough mental capacity left for rejection either, especially with how competitive the job market is nowadays. And that's where that 80% for, ticking 80% of the criteria roughly for women v roughly 30% for men comes into play. Because women already know that interviewing as a woman in tech, especially for engineering, they are held to a different standard. You want to try and ensure that you're not going to have to go through round and round of rejection, right? When you're already feeling fragile. Mm-hmm. And you know that, okay, things are bad, but I have job security. I've got what I need. I just need to grit my teeth and get through it.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of challenges, and you're a champion of diversity, and you're pushing this, which is really commendable. What are the key strategies that others can employ to also represent and bring more equality and equity into the workplace?
So firstly, I'm a big believer in equity over equality. And for those who don't know the difference, equality is that you treat everyone exactly the same. My issue with that is that we're not all exactly the same. You need to treat people in a holistic way. You need to treat people as individuals with individual backgrounds and individual needs and individual requirements. And that's where equity comes in. The whole point of equity is that the outcome is that you all have been given the same opportunity, but taking into account each individual person's needs to get there. There's a really great comic or drawing I see a lot of the time with three people looking over the fence watching like a football, baseball game or something. Mm-hmm. And you've got a dad who can just see over the fence. And then you've got kind of a kid, but a slightly older kid who's on a little box. And then you've got the youngest kid who's on like multiple boxes, so they can all see over the fence. And that's the same height, most importantly. That's equity. Whereas with equality, it's they're all just given boxes. So you're then actually, you're not equaling the playing field. Uh-huh. You're still actually disproportionately helping those who already have privilege.
You've just drawn a really nice picture in my brain. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's something that is, I think once it clicks in your head, other things then fall into place. Because once you understand the fact that people have not all been given the same opportunity, and that women and minorities might not be on paper where they should be in their career, that doesn't mean that they don't have the capability, they don't have the skills. It's that they may have just not been promoted because of the way that they were treated in the culture, and that because they weren't part of the homogenous set that the rest of the team or company was, that's actually held them back. And once that clicks, I think the actions and the things that people can do naturally quite fall into line, because you start looking at candidates as a whole, not just, okay, I've been given a CV that summarized, 8 years of their life into one page. It's about, learning who they are. And I think it's really important. That's where recruiters are really important, because the CV is only one part of it, right? What the recruiters are able to do is actually learn about who they are and communicate that in a way that a CV can't. Mm-hmm. But it's also really important that your interview process reflects the fact that everybody has different skills and needs. And a big thing that I believe in is that you need to, obviously each company is different. But for me, when I've hired people and I've hired engineers of different levels, or I've been part of interview processes, the big thing for me is I'm actually getting rid of old school coding tests for engineers. For one, I hate them because I freeze. If I've got a group of people watching me and it's something that I can do normally with my eyes closed, my brain isn't focusing on that. It's focusing on the fact that I'm being judged. And I don't feel like it actually really highlights the candidate's skills. Instead, I've gone for more of a conversational approach. I present a problem. We talk through how would they fix that problem, what architecture would they use, what patterns might they use, depending on how senior they are. And I challenge them. And I'll say, okay, well, that's one way of doing it, but actually we can't do it that way because of whatever reason. How are you going to approach that? And how are they going to approach figuring things out that they don't know? That's a critical thing. The big thing with this is that as soon as you make it clear and you get them settled, and you're really making it clear that there's not an inherent right or wrong answer here. Like, obviously, there are some really wrong answers, and that normally is more, have they understood the question?
Yeah.
But this is about seeing how they approach a problem. And that's really what tech is about. It's about problem solving. It isn't about who can write what language, unless they're really, really junior, like, they're a grad and you need to just make sure they have the basics down that you can then teach. The more senior you get, it isn't about, can I memorize this algorithm? That's what Google is for. And with ChatGPT, Copilot, things like that, the industry is really going towards being, ensuring that engineers who will really be able to thrive and flourish, those who can solve problems. And that's where diversity is critical, because the more diverse your team is, the different experiences they will have.
True.
And that will result in a product that's more well-rounded, because they will be able to bring in different experiences and they will problem solve in different ways. And if you have a culture that is psychologically safe, so it means that anyone can bring up questions or disagree, say, we've been working on this for 3 months and I've just realized we've missed this critical thing that actually means we're going to isolate 30% of our required user base and stuff like that. You will build a product that people want to use because it's not inherently isolating people from being able to use it.
True. Let me ask you then, what would be your message to those engineering leaders, company owners, executive teams? What's the message that a diverse workforce, a broader set of voices, personalities, is a good thing? Why is this a good thing, what you do, why you champion diversity?
So from the point of view of a business owner, ultimately in the long run, you're going to create better products and that will result in more money. We're in a capitalist society. But also the more diverse your teams are, the more diversity will come. People don't want to be the only woman or the only black woman in a company or the only minority, because you stand out. So the more diversity you have, the more comfortable people will feel joining. But also it's about, ultimately, you're really shooting yourself in the foot when you only have one, type of person. And I'm saying type here because, it's not just about, it might just be white men or this or that. It's also about culture and making sure that you have a diverse culture and that when you're bringing people in, they're adding to that culture, not just fitting into the existing culture, but helping it grow and evolve.
I love that. Do you have a message then that also gives encouragement and impetus for more software engineers that are female to either join the workforce or to stay? You were saying, weren't you, that what's the stat? 40-something% of women leave within...
45% of women who enter the tech industry leave within the first 8 years by the age of 35.
Okay.
That was a study done, I think, in 2022.
Okay. So why should people stay and why should they join?
I think they should stay because it is improving, and that they joined for a reason, right? Engineers often love the problem solving. They love the rush of actually getting something working and built. And if it's a UI, being able to see it, if it's an API, knowing how it's used and actually really helping your customers. And there are more and more companies that genuinely care, and things won't change unless people get more and more used to the diversity. But that doesn't mean just stay in a company because you're the only woman and you're worried it will look bad if you leave. Find somewhere that works for you as a person. And I always recommend that, if there's a company you're interested in, reach out to somebody who works in that company. Find out actually what is it like. Use your network. And I think that women should join because it's a lot of fun. It's a really fun career. And yes, it's hard at times. And yes, you can face sexism. And yes, it can be frustrating. But it can also be so satisfying. And tech is diverse. That's the thing. It is a diverse industry. We just need to ensure that companies are prepared for diversity and know how to handle it, right? And you meet such a varied group of people with such varied niche interests that, you're never bored. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new challenge. There's always something to scratch that itch. And it's also a career that really works with having a squiggly career. I'm a big believer that you shouldn't just have a linear career. Things will move around all the time. You might do a couple of years in people management, a couple of years as IC, and switch around, right? It's a career that you can go in whatever direction you want, and there is always people actually there to help support you. It might just be that you need to find those people.
You do. Listen, I'm sure we're pretty much out of time now. But Sarah, thank you so much. What I take from this is that it's everyone's business.
Yeah.
We're one human race.
Exactly.
And a lot of us are in the tech community, in the tech industry, building companies, building products and services that everybody uses. So it is everybody's business. Thank you so much for championing and pioneering and getting on the podium and going to conferences and going to companies and corralling and encouraging those leadership teams to be more diverse in their workforce. It's really wonderful what you do. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. And I would encourage anyone who wants to hear more or learn more to visit my website. It has a lot of recordings of different podcasts, my talks and stuff like that. And always feel free to reach out. And it was an absolute pleasure being here today. So thank you for having me.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for spending your time with us today. It's been another Numi Talks episode. We have plenty more on the way. So please subscribe. Thank you again.